We have Jeff Perez on. Jeff, how's it going?
Hey, Nigel, how's it going? Can you hear me okay on this side?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Hear you loud and
Perfect.
clear. And so Jeff is one of the application engineers here on our team. One of my colleagues here work really closely with Jeff in the office, and sometimes when he's at his home office, like he is today, and like a lot of us are too. So we definitely hope everyone is doing okay and are all safe as where we're at in the world. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and get started here talking about some Inventor and Revit interoperability. And some of the reason that some of this came up is they added a lot of functionality with Inventor and Revit Interop in 2021 Inventor. And Jeff's going to show some of that today. I'm sure he'll go into that a little bit deeper moving forward. But there certainly is a lot of need for certain types of companies to be able to start using some of this interop, and Jeff will explain a little bit of what that means for those people as we start going through the presentation here today. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A, and then we'll go ahead and address those at the end. Anything else there to add, Jeff, before we get started?
Nope, that is everything, Nigel. Thank you for that. So I'll start off then, and we'll go through this PowerPoint.
Cool. Sounds good, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. So like as Nigel said, we are going to be talking about the new Inventor and Revit interoperability inside of 2021 specifically for Inventor. And let me just go through here. Now for today's agenda, let me just stop this really quick. For today's agenda, we are going to be talking about Inventor and Revit interoperability, what AnyCAD for Revit specifically is, and then types of areas of focus and who this interoperability is for in terms of our customers. And then after this, we'll end off and I'll go through a workflow overview of this. Now, currently, Inventor and Revit's interoperability right now it's a link between your manufacturing tools and your AEC tools. Currently with Inventor right now, the current kind of pathway that we have for having this interoperability to Revit is being able to natively export Revit families within Inventor, and then also be able to export these .adsk files as well. So if you're dealing with outside consultants that don't have any Autodesk software, maybe they're just kind of within a single platform that they need to be able to input this data, you could export it to the ADSK file type currently. What got recently introduced inside of Inventor 2021 Professional is now we have the ability to reference in directly 3D Revit files in their native file format, which is a Revit file. So now we have the ability to keep these links associatively to our Revit files. Or before, if you were kind of used to bringing in some of these files into Inventor, a lot of the Revit users had to do a lot of kind of exports to SAT files or a different type of file format that they could bring inside of Inventor. So now with this being native in here, we're going to be able to keep that interaction and keep the link between your Revit file and your Inventor file, whether you're receiving these files from some disciplines that you're working with, or even some of these BIM projects that you could be participating in. You definitely will now be able to have a live link to your Revit file that you're going to be using to reference to populate your own designs. Now, what exactly is AnyCAD for Revit? If you don't know, Revit introduced AnyCAD. And what AnyCAD does, it allows Inventor users to, sorry about that, if I said Revit, I meant to say Inventor, but what AnyCAD is, it allows Inventor users to bring and import in files directly into Revit and actually use these files so that you can reference to create your geometry. Now within Revit, like I did mention, it's keeping an associative link. So if you have a multidiscipline environment within your company, maybe you have a architectural team in there, and then maybe you also have a mechanical team that's doing specialized duct designs or even specialized AEC equipment, you can now collaborate between each other within your own discipline now and utilize the native Revit files. So now, again, we're going to be removing these multiple file imports that you would have to do within Revit and export those out to Inventor. And again, this is just going to enhance a collaborative environment within your company's needs. So right here, you can see that we do have several different file formats that Inventor does take. So you can see that there's some ASM products. It's going to take in your SAT files, STP files, and again, we are highlighting several different Autodesk products that you could also bring into your Inventor models as well. Okay. Now, in terms of areas of focus, so a lot of the companies that really are going to be able to leverage this are going to be companies that specialize in building products and equipment. And you could kind of see, I do have several examples here. So you could have companies that are building specialized AEC units, or even companies that are creating elevator units that are going to be inside of a custom building that's getting developed. So you're going to want to utilize that BIM model and bring it into your Inventor project so that you could properly size maybe one of these panel doors that are going to be inside this elevator shaft here. Another thing is custom fabrication. So fabrication like this staircase that we see here. You can see that a lot of this is going to really have to be coordinated with your architectural model in terms of making sure that it fits within the guidelines of the building design. This is just going to allow you to gain that visibility that you probably weren't being able to see beforehand when you were not bringing in Revit files directly into an Inventor. Another example of this is some building equipment and layout, and this is going to be specifically for like facility design or laying out equipment plans or any specialized conveyors that you may be building. I could see that being utilized a lot within that industry, and as well as modular construction. So maybe you're designing these remote sheds that are going to be built, or any little townhomes that are modular in terms of design and construction that could be fabricated within a layout design or a given space that you may have. I can see that being heavily used within the modular construction. And obviously, the last would be AEC and AEC engineering. That's going to be heavily used I could see where you're going to have a lot of lighting manufacturers that need to create custom light fixtures that are going to be inside of your building or inside of your layouts. You'll want to coordinate that light design with the architect so that they could place that finalized design of a specialized fixture that you may be building for a project, so that the architectural designer can then bring that into the model once it's been finalized in terms of the design. Nigel, did you have any other ideas or any other type of disciplines that could kind of use this?
Yeah, so there's a lot, right? So, and like a lot of the reason, and I'm sure some people are asking some of our regular Inventor users, is like, why do I need Revit files, or why do I need to export to Revit files, you know, when I have my Inventor files already and I kind of pass them over to the wall to the other people? Well, for a lot of those disciplines, right, especially like for people who do like custom fabrication, maybe you're doing some process plant stuff, sometimes this can make sense. And sometimes even building product manufacturers, right? You want to be able to get your stuff spec'd into Revit models directly. That's something that a lot of those architectural firms are asking for more and more, as we've seen from some of the customers asking us. And we want to be able to share that kind of knowledge with everybody else. You do have your Inventor model, and architectural people is like, well, why do we need an Inventor to model things? And a lot of the reason is an Inventor, right? You want to do a lot of your detail modeling, especially for some of these really, really large custom fabrication components, because once you add like, 10 to 15 to 20 of those in a model, you start to get some performance disadvantages, I would say. So we do see a lot, as of recently, and I'd say recently as the last couple of years, start to see people start moving into, maybe they've traditionally thought of themselves as a manufacturing house, but they're building stuff to go into the AEC side of the business or the AC side of the industry. So I've seen a lot of passover of these files lately, and then, Autodesk has made that a lot easier with some of the stuff they've added in 2021.
Mm-hmm. Whereas before, like if I ever received a Revit model, and maybe I needed to design this particular AC unit that's on top of this roof right here, it would have been really hard for me to bring in the Revit file directly into an Inventor. You would have got a lot of performance hits because it's trying to load in that full Revit file, the full project. Whereas now you can really kind of tailor the area where you're going to be focusing in terms of your design inside of Revit, so that when you bring it into your model, you're not using all your processes and all resources within your computer system to run the project itself. So we'll dive into that shortly, but there's a particular workflow to kind of minimize what you're actually bringing into from Revit inside of Inventor. So these are kind of the areas of focus. Right now, what I'm going to do now is I'll jump into Revit, and then we'll talk about some of the workflow for this. Okay. So within Revit, this is something you're going to want to, whether you are fabricating a custom component within your company, or maybe you are collaborating your designs with an architectural side, with the BIM within the BIM or within the AEC side. When you're receiving your Revit models, and before you introduce this Revit file into Inventor, one thing you're going to want to be aware of, or something that you're going to want to kind of talk to who's sending you over this Revit file, is for them to set up a proper 3D model space for you. And that's what I'll talk about now shortly. So I'm going to open up this example Revit file I have here. And what I mean by this is, inside this view, I do have this building design right here. And there's several different stories, and this looks like it's going to be like a school that's possibly being developed. Now, in terms of the preparation for this model, what I would suggest you do is you reach out to your architectural team or whoever's providing this Revit model, and for them to create your own unique 3D views. Now, you can do this yourself if you do have Revit, or like I did say, I would mention this with your architectural team or whoever's providing you your Revit file, so that they can create a 3D view based on your company's needs. And what I mean by that is, if I'm going to go in, if I zoom into this area right here where I see this ceiling space right here, I can see that maybe I'm going to be dealing, as an architectural designer here, maybe I'm going to be dealing with a custom vendor that's going to be fabricating this frame for my windows, or maybe they're going to make a custom window fabrication for me for this ceiling space here. Right now, typically, during a project's life cycle, a lot of architects tend to bring in placeholder components. And what I mean by that is there's probably components here that aren't technically finalized yet. And that's what this is here. So you can see I have this open space here. And I'm going to go into this as a perspective as maybe I'm a company that makes this custom fabrication for these window ceilings here. So before I start my initial design, I'm going to want to size my design based on the ceiling space. So within Revit, I'm going to have Revit set up a custom view for me. And for me to do that, I'm just going to duplicate this view with detailing really quick. And I'm going to turn on my auto section box. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change my sectioning so that I'm viewing specifically the area that I want to work in. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to cut down to this ceiling space over here. And why I'm doing this is because I want to minimize the amount of elements I'm bringing into my Inventor model. So you can see I'm just cutting out and only going to show visible areas that I want to work in. So really, I only need to see the top roof and maybe a little bit more of this ceiling space right here. So this is probably going to be good enough, something like that. Okay. Now that I have this 3D view set up, and I'm going to orientate my work in this open area right here. Okay. And what it's going to take for me to do is simply save this file and then synchronize it. And then now this portion is ready for me to be inserted into my Inventor model. Now, if you are going to be working in other areas within this building, you could then ask your architectural designer or whoever's providing a Revit file to create additional 3D views for you to process your work. And then you could also have them name those 3D views specifically for you. That way you could easily find them when you're going to place them into your model. So what I'm going to do here is just rename this really quick, and I'm going to name this 3D view ceiling space. Oops. So 3D ceiling space. Okay. So I have that view saved. Now I'm just going to save and then synchronize this. So now the preparation from the Revit model is done. We could jump into Inventor now. And now within Inventor, I'm going to start my initial design. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to start a assembly file. Okay. Now within this assembly file, we can place the file in a couple different ways. We could place it from imported CAD file, and I can navigate to exactly where that Revit file is saved at. And in this case, I do have this Revit file in my file folder location here, and I could insert it this way. Another thing I did want to highlight is if this project happened to be a BIM 360 collaborative project, you can utilize Desktop Connector and pull in BIM 360 projects directly inside of Inventor. So I do have BIM 360 here as well, and I can navigate to my BIM 360 project as well. And I could open it and insert it this way as well. So there's a couple different ways you could insert these projects. Okay. Now that change I just did for that 3D view isn't a part of this BIM 360 project, so I'll go back to my native Revit location, and I'm just going to click Open. Now what's going to happen here is Inventor is going to use it's going to use AnyCAD functionality, and now it's going to allow you to pick and specify the exact 3D view you want to insert into your project. And in this case, I did create this view, 3D ceiling space. Once I select that view, it's going to recognize that, and it's going to give you an estimated count or an exact count of elements that you have existent in this view. I'm just going to click OK and let this load into the project. And this does take a little bit depending on how many elements you have inside of your Revit model. One thing I do want you to be aware of is if you do have an element or a model over 500 elements, it may take a lot longer to process and load into your project. Okay. So now you can see, oops, so switch to Revit. So now you can see now within Inventor, I could place this as grounded origin. And doing that, I'm guaranteeing that I am going through the same coordinate system as the Revit model. So we're sharing the same coordinate system between the Revit model now and my Inventor model. Okay. Now there's two types of ways we can design this frame system. And I'm going to switch to part priority really quick. I could make an adaptive frame. Maybe I wanted to make this be adaptable so that if this opening changes in terms of size, I could have my frame update with that automatically. Or in this case, in one example, I have a frame already done, and let me bring it in here. I have a frame assembly that I've already started to construct, or I can then constrain this to my location. Oops. I'm just going to finish constraining this. And then I could have a frame. Then I could use some of my additional tools, and within here, I'm just going to use Frame Generator, and I'm going to populate some additional members. That way I could finish this initial design of this window frame I'm going to be making here. So I could populate all these members here, and then I could use this as my basis for my design. Let's just click OK. So there goes my initial design going. Now let's see what happens if I save this really quick. I'm going to save this as a new project or a new assembly. And we're going to call this ceiling assembly. And I'll click OK. Now I want to show you the associativity of this now. If I were to change a design element within this Revit model, I'd like for you to see the implications that we get within Inventor. So now that this project has been saved, I'm just going to jump back into Revit really quick. And let's take a look at this. So you can see the associativity between the Revit model and Inventor. So if I go inside Inventor and if I was the architect, maybe that ceiling space wasn't exactly what I needed. I'm just going to change this overall design. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this out. I could cut out the opening a little bit more, but we're just going to change the outside limit really quick. And I'm just going to save this and then synchronize it and click OK. Okay. Now that's been saved. I could go back into Inventor. And what you're noticing right away is we're getting these update icons. So Inventor is already recognizing that this model that we've included from Revit has a change, and it wants us to publish and update that change. So we'll update that. And what we should see now is that change that we did within Revit come through on the Inventor side, and it did right away. So Inventor recognized that change happened right away within inside of Inventor. Okay, so I could collapse all, and we can see how that changed. Okay, so now that I'll save this really quick, and I'll close out of this assembly. Now another example of this is I have this other assembly, and we'll show you this, is creating an adaptable assembly. And I'll click OK. And this one's going to take a little bit longer because of the way I orientated this 3D view. And what you can see now, I did insert this already beforehand, and I specified it to a particular 3D view that I set up inside of Revit, which is this 3D view slide ladder. You can see that we are getting a more visibility of the building inside of Inventor. And if I zoom in here, I started to lay out a ladder design that I'm going to have on the side of this, almost like your window on this building right here. So with this ladder here, I created this so that it could be adaptable. So you see that this is an adaptable assembly. And what this is going to allow me to do is if this extended out within the Revit model, or if the architect changed this design in any way, it will allow for this ladder assembly to move with it. Okay, and the way I did that is I created, once my view was inserted inside from Revit into my Inventor model, I created an assembly in place. And then I created a part in place as well so that I could create a skeleton model. Now that I had created that skeleton model within here, I could then go into this adaptable assembly and then begin to populate the remainder of my frame members that I need in here. And that's what I'll do really quick. And we'll just select one of these and we'll populate some remainders of these frames. And then I could click OK. Okay. So this is going to allow you to view and see your assemblies that you're creating that are going to be reflected within your Revit model directly inside of Inventor. Now, if I save this, and if I change this 3D view really quick, let's go inside of Revit, and I know that I'm using this side ladder 3D view. But what if this was giving me a big slowdown in performance? I could update this view and change the way I section this inside of Revit. And that's what I'll do really quick, just so that we're not loading as much of this building information inside of Inventor to slow down my overall project. So we'll update this. I'll go inside of Revit. Inside of Revit, I'm going to activate that 3D view I created. And in this case, it's this side ladder 3D view. I could update this 3D view. Just kind of change this a little bit. So now really I'm just kind of seeing a little bit more of the front of the building, but now we're cutting off some of the back that was introduced. I can then just save this, synchronize it. And now that's been saved, I could jump back into Inventor, and I see that we are getting the lightning bolts to publish a new update. And we'll let this update go through. And a lot of this, again, is depending on how you are setting up this 3D view. Now, sometimes you can see it did cut off some of these elements. So you can see this element did end right here. But what's going on is inside of Revit, the actual floors are sticking out longer than this element. So the benefit of using your native Revit model is we could dig into these specific elements and turn them off. Or you could use functionality like your view representations and suppress some of these features. So if we created say a new level of detail, or a new view rep, we'll do that. Let me get out of this. So I'll make a new view rep. I could then go into this view rep and turn off some visibilities of some of these parts that I don't want. And again, a lot of this is going to be on like your floors or maybe roofs that are kind of cutting across your section view. You could then go through these and turn particular elements off in terms of that view representation that we saved. Once you have that kind of configured to what your needs are, you can then save it and then you continue to utilize that Revit model inside of your Inventor project. Okay. And that's really it for me. That's just a quick little introduction to how you can create some adaptable assemblies with your native Revit models, or you can do a little bit more of a traditional approach like I did in my other assembly, where you create and fabricate an assembly and then you could constrain it to your assembly, to your Revit model itself. So if you don't want, if your architect or whoever's creating the Revit files themselves are changing these files in the background and you don't want your file to continually update with it and be adaptable, you can go more of a traditional approach in terms of a construction for an assembly. So that way you can automatically tell by a change inside of the Revit model that you need to go back and update your assembly. So a couple of different ways you could go about creating these files or these model files that you're going to be using for whether you're creating BIM projects or any of those construction, custom fabrication models, any building equipment, any modular construction, any of those, you could definitely utilize this. Okay. And then I think that's it for me in terms of this demo. We'll just jump back to this PowerPoint. Any questions or answers? I think that's where we're going to end off next. Nigel, did we get anything?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat panel as well. So,
yeah, I don't see any questions so far.
I got a question here. Looks like Chris is asking if Inventor 2021 is already out. You guys are showing it on the screen. So yeah, it's been out for what, about 6 to 8 weeks now.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the time is going to be saved by really specifying what kind of 3D view you need for your company's needs. You're going to really want to kind of establish that groundwork up front. You're going to want to kind of coordinate that design in terms of, like in case of that ladder, really I only needed a small corner of that building itself. So beforehand, you would try to insert the entire Revit file inside of like Inventor 2020, and that's going to slow down your system tremendously. Where now we can really kind of tailor these 3D views to the specific needs that we want in our areas, and then further build off our construction design or our fabrication design that we want. So you're going to get a lot of time savings with this functionality now. And you can see now if you need to go back and edit some of those 3D views, it's going to automatically update within Inventor for you natively now.
Exactly. And so like it even gets more efficient if you start using some of the desktop connector stuff, right? You don't have to, like for example, like email that file over, and then
Yep.
just make sure it's in the same location. But if it's in the desktop connector, it'll notify you because it's syncing to where that is located in the cloud. So something to note there, and I think that's the biggest thing.
And one thing I didn't really mention too much too is I did talk about you can use Desktop Connector and pull in directly your Revit files that may be BIM 360 projects. You can have those and use those. So as a Revit file is going through its BIM life cycle and it's changing, you're going to see those changes come through automatically because you're using Desktop Connector to make sure that you have a consistent design throughout the entire project's life cycle.
Yep. There's some questions about, like, we showed a lot of the workflow from Revit to Inventor. Jeff, can you explain what it looks like going the other way?
Yep. So I actually we did an AVA on this before, and I forgot to actually link it within my presentation, but I'll make sure we do link that. I did do an in-depth video of how we can export RFA files, how you could create your BIM content, whether you want to add unique properties to any of this content that you're developing. That way you can introduce that content into Revit as native RFA files, or like I did say, .adsk files. I will make sure that we link that, Nigel, so that anyone else who hasn't seen that AVA could go back and watch that one from a couple months ago.
And then if you want to jump into Inventor real quick too, Jeff, and just kind of show where the toolbar for that exists.
Yeah, let me do that really quick, just so everyone is aware. So that is going to be under your Environments tab over here. And then in the Environments tab, there is this BIM Content folder. And then inside of our BIM Content, but there's a BIM Content module. Inside of there, depending on what you are going to be publishing, whether it's cable tray connectors or maybe you're creating some tube and pipe connectors, you're going to want to use some of your MEP connectors and then go through some of the authoring components of this for your building components that you're making, whether it's some AC units or anything else that's going to be utilized within BIM or inside of Revit projects. I would go through and update all these properties as much as you can. And then you would go through this export building components, and it's going to allow you to determine what type of file type you want to export to, whether it be an RFA file for Revit files or, like I did say, .adsk files. Okay. And again, yep. And again, I did cover this in another AVA, so we'll make sure we have this linked for everyone so that everyone could reference that video and rewatch it if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's been there for quite some time. It was the AnyCAD stuff that's completely brand new, right?
I think Matthew had one. Can you bring in multiple 3D spaces, for example, connecting two buildings with a conveyor? So Matthew, one thing about that is you can't really, I guess you could bring in another model, but I probably wouldn't do that if you create an adaptable assembly. And why I say that is because you could go back into these Revit files that we have, and we could change the export of this. So let me get out of this BIM content. We can change the import. So I could change what view of the 3D view I was actually referencing beforehand. But if you do an adaptable assembly, depending on where it's created, for instance, maybe I have this adaptable assembly on this portion of this building right here. But if I change my 3D view to a different portion of the building that may not even include that, you may lose some of that adaptability and some of those constraints. So that's something that will end up happening. What I would recommend you do is, what you can do is you can have your architect or whoever's creating these Revit files create multiple 3D views for you that you can utilize, so that when you're creating a brand new assembly, you can place in a completely independent 3D view to another assembly that you may have that may be utilizing, say, this 3D ceiling space view that I created early on. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, Matthew.
There's another question that came through the chat too. Is the desktop connector free? And Jeff, do you want to cover that for us?
Yes, so I'll make sure to link that as well. But yes, the desktop connector is free. If you just search on the internet, and let me just look it up really quick, Autodesk desktop connector.
So if you use something like Dropbox or Box or OneDrive, it's similar in functionality to the drive that's on your computer that you can load stuff into, and then it'll like automatically upload to the cloud or download stuff from the cloud. So
Correct.
if you're familiar with how Box and stuff works with the folder that's on your computer, right, like next to your C drive and stuff, this works almost identically to that.
Yep.
And so it is free.
And then for the desktop, it is free. You're just going to want to download it right here, this Windows 64-bit. And like Nigel said, if you are familiar with OneDrive or any of these cloud-based solutions, it's going to end up creating a connection point for you within your desktop. So I do have one for Fusion, and I also have one for BIM 360. And it's going to allow you to navigate to your cloud projects that you have with Desktop Connector, and you could reference in the files that way.
And then that makes it easier too when they get updated from, you know, whoever the source was before you. If they update it in the on the BIM side of things through like BIM 360, it'll come down to you, and then you'll be able to see some of those changes. So if those changes are going to influence how you do your mechanical design, you want to make sure those come in. So.
Yep.
I think that's
Do we have any
everything.
other questions?
Jeff? I'll give everyone another 30 seconds or so to ask any more that they do have. While we're waiting for those questions, we'll go over some of the scheduling for the next couple of weeks. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be going over some of the what's new in Fusion 360. So Fusion 360 is a product that evolves pretty consistently. And so they've added a lot of functionality within both the manufacturing side and the design side in Fusion 360. And we're going to be having separate sessions for each of those. So keep that in mind. And then Tom asks, when importing Inventor models into Revit, especially when my Revit model has a bunch of imported models in it, how can I keep my model running smoothly and not bogged down without turning off all of the Inventor models?
That is great, Tom. So again, I did cover some of this as well within my previous ABA, but just to kind of recap, within Inventor, when bringing in your Inventor models to Revit specifically, what I would do is I would use a lot of Inventor's shrink wrap functionality to kind of almost like simplify your model, really, is what you want to do. You don't want to be, for instance, maybe you are developing an AC unit. You're not going to want to bring in an AC unit with all the various internals that is required for that AC unit to function. So I would use some of the simplification tools within Inventor to kind of simplify that model design, and then go to the BIM content export that I just mentioned a little bit ago to then publish my RFA file from Inventor. And with that RFA file, it should be relatively a lot smaller file size, so that when it's being brought into your Revit model, it shouldn't really hinder the performance at all, just because it is just a native RFA file. It's almost like a part file within Inventor.
Yep, absolutely. And so let me go ahead and I have the link to your ABA, Jeff, already handy. I think I grabbed the right one. Let me just make sure and double check. Yeah, this looks like the correct one. So let me go ahead and drop this in.
Yeah, I was actually going to look for, yep, is that the right
I
one?
just put it there. So yeah, I just added the link to Jeff's ABA where he goes over some of the Revit and Inventor model cleanup, and so some of what he just answered in the last question in regards to simplifying your model. We went over some of those simplifications and then exporting that information for. I believe you exported RFA that time, Jeff.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the only difference I did on there was I believe I exported it so that I could utilize the part for Plant 3D. So the only difference you're going to do is you're just going to change your save as to a RFA file if you need it for Revit. And that should be the only difference. The whole process and workflow should be the same, so you could simplify these models for preparation inside of Revit.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, so being able to import and export these files and work in multidiscipline is something that we're seeing a lot more of, especially like in the last, year and a half or so. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, let us know. And it looks like there might be a support question there from Thomas. Thomas, go ahead and reach out to our support team. That'll be lifeline@kativ.com. if you're running into some issues on the Revit side, and then we can see if our support team can go ahead and assist with that request.
Yep.
Let's see. I think that's just about everything we have for questions. Like I mentioned, if you have anything else, go ahead and shoot us an email or contact our support team. We're more than happy to help run through that process. But again, Jeff, thanks for going through this with us. If this is something you want to see more of in the future, definitely let us know. The more we hear about requests for certain topics, the higher it goes on our priority list. So
Yep.
last words,
And
Jeff?
And one thing too, if you want to see this more of an interaction with BIM 360 too, I'd love to do some more videos with BIM 360 and Revit and various workflows on how you can utilize BIM 360 as well. So hopefully that was helpful. And that's it for me. Nigel?
Yep, that's it for me too, Jeff. Take it easy.
Thank you all. Take care.